production keeps prices down far more effectively.
As long as suffering of sentient beings remain, I will remain in order to serve.
I imagined God like my grandfather.
In Conversations tonight, my guest was Prime Minister of his country, a democratically elected Prime Minister for nearly 3 decades. Today, he's a senior minister in the government of Singapore and widely regarded as a global statesman. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Mr. Lee, what brings you to India at this time?
Well, Prime Minister Rao met me last year in Singapore, year before last, and he asked me to come. And here I am. I promised to come, and it's a bit close to the elections, but Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, who was in Singapore a few months ago, said, no, it makes no difference. Anyway, he wanted me to meet the opposition leaders, which he had arranged for, so I met Mr. Mukherjee, Vajpayee, and Mr. Advani, and it was an interesting experience to meet Mr. Vajpayee after nearly 16 years when he was foreign External Affairs Minister for Mr. Morarji Desai. And I think useful to know that they say quite emphatically that they are, by philosophical conviction, more free market than
Previous governments in India have been.
That's right. And so I think that if that message gets across to foreign investors, it will be a great help to India.
What kind of collaboration and future do you see for Singapore investment in India? What will you go back and tell business?
First, I will tell them that regardless of the outcome of these elections, I think India will continue on this path of reform. There may be pauses because in the course of an election campaign, populist appeals may have to be made, which will make it difficult to immediately get back to sensible economic reforms. But after a while, a U-turn has to be made, and there's only one freeway now leading to prosperity, and that freeway is getting clogged up with very big countries like China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar. Everybody's getting on this freeway, and if India delays getting on to the inside track, she'll be on the outside track. So I think it's important not to lose time.
India has been sort of looking for a closer collaboration relationship with the ASEAN countries. Did you discuss that with Mr. Manmohan Singh, and what are your views on the matter?
This has been a continuing discussion for some time with my Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, and Mr. Rao, Prime Minister Rao. We have now agreed, the ASEAN countries have agreed that India will be a dialogue partner, and that's a step forward.
What do you think India needs to do to be able to get even closer collaboration and participation in ASEAN?
I do not know whether it's feasible to consider membership of ASEAN, because then you will alter the nature of ASEAN. ASEAN is a Southeast Asian grouping of medium and small countries, and it's worked. Contrary to the expectations of all the commentators, And it's worked mainly because Indonesia, the largest, now with about 200 million, have adopted a stance and a posture which made it possible for the other members to work with her on equal terms. I mean, not that we are equal to her, but we have equal rights, and there have been many cases, instances in the past, where the smaller members have disagreed, and Indonesia have accepted the majority view, for instance, on Cambodia and Vietnam. To bring India into that equation, we now become a completely different entity, and I think you will have Pakistan, and I do not believe it can retain its essential features. It will become a completely different organization, and I'm no longer Prime Minister, but I should imagine, judging from the past, I've not met the other leaders recently, they would feel they're leaving something very familiar behind for something which is quite unknown. And SAARC has not been a model which we would like to follow.
In what ways?
Well, SAARC has, perhaps I should not venture into this. You might ask more knowledgeable people like President Gayoom of the Maldives. He's expressed it to me very eloquently. And so the other smaller members, I think it's a slightly different texture of an association because of the India-Pakistan element.
You mentioned the imperatives of a government in an election year coming up with populist positions, slogans and policies. As someone who's been active in politics for a very long time, did you ever face that imperative too?
I would say in the first few elections, when it was touch and go, we had to make commitments which we would have preferred not to. And having made them, we were bound by them, and it took us a very long time to not break away, because that would be breaking promises, but to attenuate it and moderate it and finally make it less damaging. But this is in the nature of democratic elections. You want to vote, time is short, you can't change the minds of large numbers of people, so you have to humor them, knowing that it's wrong, and then find a way to half humor them and give them half what you've promised.
There's a great deal of admiration from the outside about the phenomenal success and progress that Singapore has made, and it's now classified as a developed nation. What were the sort of principal elements when you sort of came onto the helm of politics and governance in Singapore that you believed you needed to implement for this to happen?
No, that's too large a story. I think it's not something I can encapsulate in a sound bite. Briefly, you got to be in it out of conviction, not as a career. And once you've got into it, you got to make it a success, because the lives of the people depend upon you. You have asked for their mandate. They have entrusted their lives to you. I took them into Malaysia. I ran into troubles, or Singapore ran into troubles, communal riots in Malaysia. And at one time it was suggested that I should go to the United Nations as the representative, which would have been a peaceful way out for me, but I think that would have been the end of any trust, confidence that people would have placed in me. So I stayed behind, I stuck it out. It wasn't the best of solutions to separate from Malaysia, but that was what the Tunku wanted, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, and I just had to make it work. An independent Singapore was never envisaged, never wanted, never sought, but forced upon us. It was like the heart of a person with the body taken away, and I had to make it work. And I attached it to the industrial developed world, leapfrogged the region because Indonesia was confronting us, and Malaysia, having been dissatisfied with us enough to ask us to leave the Federation, was not wanting to make use of our facilities. So we leapfrogged the region, became what the liberal economists of that time, the people who ran UNCTAD, like Rahul Prabish, we were exploited by the multinationals of the developed countries. But perhaps circumstances left us with no choice, and it turned out that it was the best of all choices, and now everybody wants it. So when we traveled on that highway, there were no tolls to pay, 6 lanes all wide open, and we just raced ahead. It was a stroke of luck.
Are you sort of despairing and concerned that with the integration, in a sense, of the global economies, there is increasing pressure on the ability of countries to function autonomously?
I don't follow that. Countries still function as countries, but what it means is you have not the same capacity to isolate yourself from the international economy without paying a very heavy price. I mean, you can cut off the outside world. You can tell your multinationals, leave. You can say, I will not import your products, so I will not export mine, and just live like the old Soviet Union used to. Economic autarky, self-contained, self-resilient, and self-sufficient. And they went bankrupt. What it means, of course, is that even for big countries like the United States and Japan and Europe, they cannot now insulate themselves from the pressures of the outside world. And the pressure in this particular case is of very many billions of poorly paid workers all over the developed world being able to do the jobs, goods and services, produce goods and services at prices a fraction of what they would, if they use their labor, cost them. And so they've got massive unemployment. I mean, they can say, right, out with the outside world, the Europe of tomorrow will only manufacture with Europeans for Europe. Then their companies will just go down the drain because the Japanese will make use of the ASEAN countries, so will the Americans, and then they will fade away. And it's not just the European countries, the developed countries. We are caught in that bind. We are in an intermediate stage. Much of our work now, what we used to do, has been transferred first to Penang in Malaysia, now to Johor, to Batam in Indonesia, going off to Myanmar, going off to other countries in Southeast Asia, because we cannot afford to produce those kinds of goods at our wages. So our workers have to upgrade, learn to automate, use automated equipment, robots, computers, and produce something higher up the scale. And even blue-collar jobs are at risk because SIA, for instance, Singapore Airlines, does all its clerical accounting work in Bombay via a dedicated telephone line for about, I suppose, 1/3 the cost of a Singapore worker, or Singapore workers. Now, if SIA didn't do that, SIA would be losing money. I mean, Cathay Pacific is doing it in in China, in Shenzhen, I suppose also to a dedicated line. So globalization means that technology, especially communications, telecommunications, transportation, has made space almost no longer a critical expense factor. So you can be anywhere. You can log into your home computer and do work. I mean, I could sit here in Delhi in the Muraya Hilton, and I have my secretary has with him a little computer which can plug in, and if I get a clear line, I can access my office, get all the messages I want, and send back all the answers I want within a matter of, I expect, 4 or 5 minutes in digital signals. Now that means the world becomes one integrated whole, but divided into nation states. But where a particular job is transferable and done cheaper elsewhere and as well, and you don't do it, somebody else does it, then your competitor beats you. So India will find that she will be taking over many of the jobs which the NIEs are now doing. You've got a well-educated workforce of about, what, 200-300 million who can manage technical jobs. Your computer software programmers are amongst the best and much sought after. So are the Chinese. The Japanese will make use of you, so will the Europeans, so will the Americans, so will we, because our wages are up and therefore not as economic as getting things done in Bangalore. This means a diffusion of jobs all over the world, restructuring of the economies of the developed world and even the semi-developed world. So unless we keep on moving ahead, we will be suddenly relegated. And Malaysia will also find the same pressures on her. So it's a kind of I'm catching up with you race. And those who, by either misfortune or their own self-inflicted wounds, like Rwanda or Somalia, they are not of this world, they can't plug in, they got no satellite or any other communications, no airports, no telecoms, no stable conditions, no educated workforce. All they have are consumers of food, and so people send them food out of pity. And somehow the world's got to solve these problems.
What are the cultural implications of this information superhighway that you've mentioned?
Well, it means unless you're careful in bringing up your young so that you don't lose your own bearings, your sense of place in this world, who you are, what you are, continuity with what you represent, your culture, your family, your values, you'll become rootless. You know, if you watch Murphy Brown, or I don't know what's the latest on American sitcom, and you believe you're part of that culture when in fact you are not, I suppose you become like hyacinth, water hyacinth on the water, you know, roots but not anchored anywhere, and you float around and go over the waterfall. And
what can governments do to regulate this that's legitimate within democratic structures too?
Well, first I think it is important to bring up your young at home and in school with basic values and try and shut off outside influences on their basic values. Because the Catholic Church said and I think it's sound. Give me a child for the first 12 years, and he's mine. Now, I think 12 years won't be enough for our purposes, Singapore's purposes. I say we got a young man and a young woman properly educated in the value systems that we believe in for the first 18 years. He can go anywhere in the world. He has a compass in his mind.
But wouldn't liberal opinion cry foul that you were regulating the flow of information, of programming?
Who is liberal opinion? Are they responsible for my people? I mean, liberal opinion is a concept. I'm talking now of individuals. My people voted for my government. We are responsible. If they don't like us, they'll vote for somebody else. And obviously, whilst they are not satisfied with everything that we do, that they vote us in 9 times in a row over 35 years, the same government, obviously means that they agree with some of the basic core things we're doing. And I have not the slightest doubts that on maintaining the core values, they do not want to change. They don't mind learning technology, science, even eating hamburgers or KFC chicken.
Not chewing gum.
I think that's a nasty, dirty habit, and it affects our trains. Do you chew gum?
No.
Do Indians chew gum?
Well, some of them do, I'm sure.
Well, I hope when you run MRT trains, you make sure that they are not taken down to the MRT trains, or the doors won't shut. And we think we've not lost much. But if we are afraid that the West may laugh at us, then we'll become like the West, and then our ancestors will turn in their graves.
Lee, you're widely respected and regarded and admired as a statesman. When does a politician, you think, become a statesman?
When people like you start calling me one. I'm not sure I'm one, but if you call me one, I'm flattered. I hope I deserve it. I'm not sure I do. But whatever it is, I'm not taking a bigger size hat. I'm keeping it the same size.
Who are the statesmen that you admire, or people that you regard as statesmen?
Amongst the departed?
And the living, if there are any.
No, the living would be invidious. Amongst the departed, I would admire Charles de Gaulle. I would admire Mao Zedong. He has his faults, but he unified China and was a very great guerrilla leader. I admire Mahatma Gandhi. Totally different person. Not all of Mahatma Gandhi's teachings, I think, would be relevant in today's world, the spinning wheel, because I think that was apt for that generation. But if you believe you can solve India's problems with spinning yarn and cloth, when you are now 920 million, that's not going to happen. But he was a great man of his generation. Churchill.
Is there a single strand of a quality in all these people that you feel adds value to their life in politics?
Yes, they made a difference to the lives of their people. They rose above themselves, inspired by something other than their own greatness. Mao wanted a strong China. He didn't create it, but he created a liberated China. He unified it. And that's the beginnings of what I suppose his successor, Deng Xiaoping, is doing. And he's built, if nothing goes wrong, there's no hyperinflation, no civil war, no international wars, then I think Deng Xiaoping will go down in history as a man greater than Mao, because he built modern China. Or he started modern China. He got China started on the path to make it a modern industrial nation, and I have a great admiration for him. regardless of Tiananmen. And all the youthful Democrats who made that Statue of Liberty, they would have brought perhaps 1 week of euphoria and brought China down in chaos. As indeed, they began quarreling amongst themselves soon after they left China. But Deng Xiaoping has got China going in a way which nobody thought he could. And I think that was greatness. That's what greatness is about.
What is your agenda for yourself in Singapore politics?
I'm now a supernumerary consultant. My job is to help my Prime Minister and his colleagues to succeed. If they succeed, then what I have done before them will succeed because of the continuity that they have given it.